Hello friends, welcome to my channel. This is the second video in the video series that we are doing about setting up of Microsoft Endpoint Manager in a lab environment. Now in the previous video we were able to install Windows Server 2019 as well as promote it as a domain controller and configure an Active Directory environment. In this video we are going to try install all the prerequisites as well as try to install the config manager environment itself on one of the Windows Server 2019. Now a little bit of introduction about Microsoft Endpoint Manager, which helps deliver the modern workplace and modern management to keep your data secure in cloud and on-premise. Now by far this is the best offering to manage your mobile devices, desktop computers, virtual machines as well as servers. So a lot of you might be wondering why we suddenly started calling the SCCM, as we knew it, System Center Configuration Manager, as Microsoft Endpoint Manager. The reason is that in Ignite event of 2019, Microsoft decided that there are a lot of Endpoint Manager tools and technologies as an offering, and so they bundled them together as what they called as Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So it has offerings from the traditional config manager environment, which is pretty much the on-premise infrastructure, as well as it brings and collaborates together the Intune management capability. And if you really wanted to know more about it, this small video from Brad Anderson will tell everything you need to know about it. Right, so let's just get into our lab now. And really what I have done so far is I have managed to create a Windows domain. Take you through that. So I've created a Windows domain and I've created a few users. So if I open this Active Directory users and computer, you would see I've created a user SQL admin, which we are going to use during installation of SQL. I've created a super user and a SCCM admin user. Now if I go into this server, which I'm going to use as SCCM primary server, there really isn't much that I've done at this point in time, although I have turned off the firewall, given it a server name. I've set up a static IP address because you don't want your DHCP to be changing the server IP all the time. And I've also enabled the remote desktop, and so I am able to connect. Apart from that, I've really not done anything much. As you see, it's still in the work group. So let's do it now. Let's quickly change this. Or join it to the domain which I've created. Right, seems like it went fine. It is joining to the domain, and now it would ask us to restart the computer. Now, as you would realize in this entire video series that I'm really trying to show things from the very basic. So a very fresh student, if they want to sort of create their labs in their home and they don't have much of the infrastructure experience, they should be able to follow and create a lab of their own. Just a little bit about the actual environment that I'm using. I'm using this VMware Fusion environment. I have got 2 machines so far. I'm using one of them as a domain controller, and I'm using another one as the config manager server. If I can quickly show you the resources that I've given them, it is using 80 gigs of storage space, and I've given it 2 cores and 4 GB of memory. Now this is still less for the current branch, but given that I'm only using it on my home Mac for lab purposes, I think it should be enough. We will find out if it's not. Alright, so it seems like it joined to the domain, and now let's try to log in with a domain account. If this joined well, it should actually allow me to log in through a domain account rather than a local account. Okay. So there's my server where I will be installing the config manager environment in a short while. Let me take you through some of the steps that I would be performing. So exactly the first things that we need to do is we need to install the prerequisites. I've already shown you how my lab is configured, and I've also configured the domain. You can refer to the first video in this series to understand how to configure a domain. I have completed the media installation. I've also created the AD accounts. Now this is a very important step. Create system management container. So this is what we are going to do it right now. Let me log into our Active Directory environment. We are going to launch from the tools menu the ADSI edit. So go to tools, go to ADSI edit. We're going to right click on it and we are going to connect to the default naming context. Okay, and let's expand this one. Now we are going to go into the systems container. We're going to click on new object, and we are going to select a container, and we are going to give it a name, system management. It's not systems management, it's not system MGMT, but it's system management. Click next, click finish. Also, we are going to give the new container some permissions. So let's go back to Active Directory users and computers, and as you saw, we need to click on advanced feature, come to the systems, and we see our container which we just created. And we can right click on system management, click on delegate control, click on next, and we need to add here the computer object. We need to add here the computer object where we are planning to install SCCM. So select that one, I'll click on next. Let's select create a custom task to delegate, click on next, and we will select the first option that says the folder existing objects. Click on next. Let's select all of these and grant full control. Right, so we need to grant the first server of our SCCM environment, which is going to be the primary server. full permission to the systems management controller container. Right, so that's one of the prerequisites completed. Let's go back to the other server. Okay, so now this has been taken care of. I'll just change it to something like green. Next, another very important activity is extending the Active Directory schema. So for that, let's go back to our server. Right, now as you will see, I've already downloaded the software resources or the files. So when you're trying to download the current version, which is 2002 right now, it will come as a zipped folder. We need to unzip it, and right here, if I go under SCCM setup, under bin, under x64, I should find a tool, extend schema. Let me copy the location and let me open a command prompt. Run it as an administrator. Okay, just go till the directory. And I will just run this executable. And it says successfully extended the Active Directory schema, which is good. If we go under the root of this drive, root of the C drive, we should see a text file, and we can verify. It says successfully extended the Active Directory schema. Let's close this log file, and let's quickly go over to our notes. We'll mark it as green, and let's configure Windows Firewall. Let's see what we need to do to configure Windows Firewall. Again, let's go back to our server, and let's type wf.msc. Let's go to inbound rules. Let's create a new rule. We are going to create a port-based rule. We are going to use the TCP IP address, and the ports to be used are 1433 and 4022. 1433 and 4022. Those are the ports which are used by SQL. And remember, we're doing it for making SQL connections. Let's just select the domain profile, and let's just give it a name, ports for SQL. So we've configured the Windows Firewall, and now we have to install the roles and feature. Let's go back. Alright, so in order for SCCM or Microsoft Endpoint Manager to work properly, it requires certain Windows server roles to be installed, and in a moment we will see what are those roles. Here I should mention that I have already installed .NET Framework 3.5 feature. It's just a feature. You can install it using the Windows operating system, Windows Server Operating System CD. Now, so again, let's select this server. Let's click on the role selection page. Let's select IIS. Click next, and let's also select WSUS, Windows Server Update Service. Let's click on next. Let's select Windows and yeah, we have to select bits, and we also have to select a remote differential compression. And that's it. Let's click on next. We will leave it at default. We don't want to select the WI connectivity, rather we are going to select the server SQL server connectivity. Click on next. Now it is asking us to store updates in the following path. So let's give it a path where we want our server updates to be stored. Now remember, this is just a lab environment. I have only got one drive attached to this VM. However, in the actual production environment, there would be several drives provided to a VM. Some of them would be a locally mapped drive, which would actually be somewhere on the network. So you have to give the exact path and location of the folders. In this case, I'll just mention CWSUS. Click on next. Let's give this machine name, which is CM01. See if that works. Okay, so that came back with an error, and it's logical for us to get this error because so far we have not even installed the SQL on this machine, and therefore we practically do not have any instance, database instance on this machine to connect to. So I think we were kind of rushing through the role selection. Let me not select the server update service for now. We will come back after we have installed SQL, and we will hit install right now. So again, basically what I'm installing right now is IIS as a server role, and some of the features like remote differential compression and bits. These are predominantly the feature which Config Manager uses in order to efficiently transfer loads and loads of data to distribution points and remote distribution points in compressed and secured format. So some of you might be interested to know what actually does a bits does. So as the name suggests, background intelligent transfer service. It's intelligently designed service to transfer data over the network. From time to time, the bits service will sort of monitor the network traffic flowing through a network, and if there are interruptions, then it would kind of pause the transfer, and then it will resume when the interruptions are gone. And then it will take the cost of transfer into consideration, making the data transfer very effective mode of transfer. Right, so that's installed. Let's close this one and let's see if any restart is required. Says installation successful. Things looks all right. Maps manager, we can safely ignore this. Right, so with this we come to yet another important step, and I know WSUS is not installed right now, so I'll leave it as black, waiting to be green. So like I was mentioning, with all these prerequisites in place, we come to another very important step, that is installing installing and configuring the SQL Server. Now remember, we are in 2020, so we are using the latest offerings from Microsoft that's there for evaluation. And so in my lab, I have already downloaded the SQL version 2019 for evaluation. Now let's just take one moment back and see if let us quickly see what are the supported SQL versions. So again, we should always rely on the Microsoft documentation whenever we are under some sort of confusion, or we need to know what configurations are required and supported. So as we see here, for configuration manager, it says starting with config manager version 1910. You can use this version with cumulative update 5. That's about SQL Server 2019 Standard Enterprise, and of course the rest of the supported editions are SQL Server 2017, 16, 14. So basically the support model for configuration manager follows the support model for SQL, meaning more or less if the SQL Server itself is supported, it's more likely as of today supported by the config manager environment. So with that, let's go back to our lab. We have got the evaluation version. Let's see if we can install this one. Now, one of the things which I wanted to mention here is, and I think it's from SQL Server 2017 onwards, that a reporting server as well as the management server is not part of the typical SQL installation, and we will see that in a bit. So basically they are like add-ons which we need to install, right? So when you click on this small executable, it gets you to this page where you can download the media. I've already done that, so I'm going to mount this, and this is where my actual installation source is here. Just in case you wanted to know more, click on download media, click on ISO, and if you click on download, it will take you to the location where you want to download. Of course, it will download from Microsoft evaluation website. Right on. Now let's click on the setup, and again, as we all know, SQL is a very resource intensive technology. So I wouldn't be too much bothered if my installation or system performance goes a little slow from here on. So like I was mentioning, the reporting service as well as the management tools are not part of the typical installation. They have to be downloaded separately as an add-on. So first we will try to perform a standalone installation. We are evaluating, so click on next. This says Microsoft Evaluation Software License. We have to accept the terms and click on next. Says Microsoft Update offers security and other important Microsoft website. I do not want to check for update. And basically it is now trying to scan the products and download the setup files, etc. Okay, so looks like it's almost done with its analysis and it's ready to be installed. However, there is just one more thing that we need to do. Uh, so remember, every time we have to install SQL or SQL Server for our SCCM environment, we have to register a service principal name. So there's just a bunch of command that we need to run. So we are going to first register the net BIOS name. It says object updated, and then we are going to register the fully qualified domain name. Okay, it says object are updated. Let us try to verify if indeed this went well. So we can use this command. And we see that the two service principal names are updated. So we are good. Now you might be wondering why these service principal names are required. These are basically required to be registered by Kerberos to access the network resources. Alright, so now we are under feature selection. We will only select database engine service right here. And again, if you were working in a if you are working in an actual enterprise kind of environment, select these locations very carefully where you want your directories to be set up. However, because this is again a lab environment which I'm demonstrating, I'm just selecting what comes by default. Okay, we will select the default instance. Click on next. Now here I would actually want to give if I actually had a group, I would rather have given a group name, but since I don't have a group, let me just enter my SCCM admin and put in a password. And I will do the same for the server's database engine as well. Give it a password, select both of them as automatic, and another important step here is to always make sure that the collation which is selected here is SQL Latin 1 General CP1 CIS AS. try to read some of the blogs when that about the errors when that collision was not selected. Let's see what we got here. Let's finish the server configuration part first. Authentication mode, I want to keep it as Windows authentication, and let me add current user SCCM admin. Also, let's add SQL admin. So, like I said earlier, if we were actually dealing with a production environment, we would rather add a security group and have all these users as part of those security group. But we should be fine this way for now. Again, this is where we are selecting our directories, and for now I will leave everything at default. Yeah, and I will click on next. It says ready to install SQL Server 2019. And that's what I want. So it looks like the installation of SQL 2019 has just begun. It's a long process sometimes. It can take up to, depending upon your system configuration, the resources allocated, it can really take up a long time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause this recording for a while, and I will start it when the SQL server setup has completed. Right, so we managed to get the SQL database installed successfully. So let me close this one, and let me now try to install the SQL Server Manager. So as I have already downloaded the software, let me just run it through. And I will again select the default location.
Okay, so it seems like the management studio has installed properly and the server has gone for a restart. When it comes back up, we will install the reporting services, Ssrs as we call it, and that's the service which config manager uses for all its reporting. All right, so since I've downloaded it already, I can just run the installer. Let me select the default settings here, click on next, and let me select a default installation directory as well. And looks like the installation went just fine. Now beyond this, there is only one more prerequisite, which is Windows Adk, the assessment and deployment toolkit. However, if you remember from earlier part of this video that we are yet to install one of the server roles, that is WSUS. So that's what we are going to do now, since we already have the SQL database installed. So we will select the Windows SUS feature. We'll click next, and we will only select the second and third option. Here we provide a path to store the Windows update, and we give it a database instance to connect to. Well, this would be our SQL server which SCCM would connect to, and looks like the connection is successful. We tested it fine. It says the installation is in progress. Now while it is installing, let's quickly try to launch the SQL Server Manager just to make sure that our credentials do not have a problem and we are able to log in just fine. So yeah, it seems like it has taken our credentials, and let's just quickly make sure that the SCCM admin is having sufficient rights. For that, we go under security and logins, and we see SCCM admin mentioned there. Let me right click and go to properties. Let's see what kind of permission does this account have. Yeah, so looks about all right. And so let's close this one, and let's close this one as well, since the WSUS role is installed, which really brings us to the very last of our prerequisite installation, and so we are good to proceed with Windows ADK setup, and that's what we are going to do now. So since I've already downloaded it, and remember, now ADK does not have the Windows pre-installation environment as one of its components. So I suppose starting 1809 is when Windows PE environment, which is Windows pre-installation environment, it started getting shipped as a standalone component. So we'll see about that just in a bit. For now, let's try to launch the Windows ADK. So we will go with the default options. Let's only select the deployment toolkit and the USMT features. Because that's like the bare minimum that we need at this point in time. So again, a Windows ADK has components which SCCM or config manager uses for a variety of reasons. And if this is not installed and we are trying to install the config manager, it will come back with an error during the pre-check stage. So looks like it is installing fine. It is installing feature. It usually does take some amount of time. And there it is. It says it's ready. Let's close this one, and now we are going to install the Windows PE. Now this is where the config manager picks up the boot images from. And for those of you who want to understand what boot images is, it's like the basic set of files which Windows require to load rest of the operating system files.
We have seen we were able to install all the prerequisites, including the Windows ADK, Windows PE, the SQL Server itself, and before that we also installed some of the important Windows Server roles. So let's look at our notes and see which of the activities are completed. Here's our notes. I think we can turn all of these into green now. So basically we saw in previous part of the video that we joined our computer to domain, we downloaded the media, we created the Active Directory accounts, extended schema, we installed the required web server roles, no, I'm sorry, not web server, Windows server roles, and we also performed these steps. One thing that we didn't do so far was to configure the SQL Server memory allocation, and I guess we are just about at the right time to perform that configuration. So we need to open the SQL Server Management Console. Okay, and we will log in here. So what happens is SQL itself is a very high memory consuming. It's a resource intensive application, as we know. So we need to set the minimum and the maximum server memory. Okay, so what we have done here is we have set the minimum and maximum memory that SQL or SCCM can use. Basically, SQL can use for processing. Now, this is not as per the strictest Microsoft recommendation. It should at least be 8 gigs in the maximum server memory. Because we are working in a lab environment, we will leave it at that. Let's close the SQL Management Studio. Go back to our folders and let's launch the splash screen. Now friends, this is where the actual installation of Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Manager starts. So let's click on next. I will say install a configuration manager primary site. And although we did not discuss about the architecture of SCCM or config manager, because that in itself is a very vast topic to capture, basically it has a very flat architecture. There is a central administration site, and then there are primary sites within that central administrator site. However, if the environment is not big enough, you can only have one primary site, and that's what we are going to do right now. We are going to install the evaluation version of the product. Let me accept all these terms of licenses. Now, what this config manager installer does is every time it downloads the latest components which it needs for the installation. You can have it downloaded previously and you can just sort of browse and attach it here. In my case, I will need to in my case I will need to install them, download and install them. And that's where it's trying to download 48 files. Remember, it will go one by one and it will do the same thing for the 48 files. So let me just pause the installation here. While it is still trying to download the files, let me quickly take you through the size that SCCM can support. So I would really recommend anyone trying to learn more about Config Manager visit this site at least once to understand the enormity of devices which a Config Manager environment can support. So like I said, there is a central administration site. A central administration site can support up to 25 primary child, 25 child primary sites. Each primary site can support up to 250 secondary sites. Again, secondary sites are created when you have a lot of users in a remote area, and you want to avoid the WAN traffic. And I think that's what's mentioned over here. What's most interesting to see and sort of summarize it, a standalone primary site. So the stuff that we are building right now, it's a standalone primary site. It can support 175,000 of total clients and devices, wherein it can support up to 150,000 Windows client, and there is a very less likelihood that you might come across organizations which has more number of devices than that. I'm not saying there aren't, but usually that's about like good enough configuration in case you're supporting like a 50,000 device kind of scenario. A standalone primary site is all that required, unless they are not really spread out in multiple geographies, in which case you might want to go with secondary site installation, or maybe another primary site, so that database can replicate within two primary sites. Okay, and moving ahead with the installation, it says what server language you need to select. I have selected English, which comes there by default. Again, the client language should be English. And I'm going to give it a site code. Site code are usually like a 3-letter denomination for your sites. You can select like PRI for primary. In my case, I will select PDC for like primary data center, and I will give it a site name. And again, I would leave the installation folder at default, and I'm also installing the configuration manager console. So what this means is, towards the end of the installation, I also want this installer to install a configuration manager console. It says join the primary site to an existing hierarchy. I do not want to do that. Like I mentioned, I want to install a standalone site. And it will say, in case you want to join this to another hierarchy, you can do so at a later point in time. I will select instance as blank. So it says leave blank for default. Again, I will leave this as default, but in an actual enterprise environment, we can set it based on the actual values. Now here it says all site systems role accept only HTTPS connection from clients. What does it mean? What it means is all the clients, or all the communication that is happening, it's happening in a secured way, through an encrypted HTTPS communication. Right now, I would select configure the communication method on each site system role. So selecting this option allows the communication to take place either through HTTP or HTTPS. Of course, HTTPS, which is more secure, is given priority. But in the instance HTTPS or those kind of setup is not available, it can communicate through regular HTTP. Now say the management so what this means is I'm also trying to install a management point and a distribution point. Basically, management point is the system site or site system which controls all the policy generation, allocation, and communication. And distribution point is a site system which handles all the contents. So, for example, applications or software or images, all they are stored on a distribution point, from where they are pushed on to a client. Let's click on next. Says I do not want a proxy server setup. Let us review all these settings for one more time. Alright, so this is where it checks for if all the prerequisites are met. Remember, we can always run this prerequisite check even if we do not want to start the installation, and in order to do that, what we can do is we can go under SMS setup bin x64, and here should be a prerequisite. Yeah, so if we try to run this one even before starting the installation, we would have a fair idea of how much we are meeting this prerequisite requirement. Now I see that it is throwing up some warnings. Says SQL authentication security. So I think we need to change that one. And it says a memory allocation. Exactly as I mentioned earlier, Configuration Manager requires us to reserve a minimum of 8 gigabytes of memory. That's for the optimum utilization and processing. So looks like we are good to begin our installation. So again, let the installation begin, and it's going to take a good amount of time. This is a very time consuming step, depending upon again the network bandwidth available and the resources at your disposal. For me, I'm sensing it's going to take anywhere between 1 to a couple of hours. So really, I'm going to wait over it and pause the recording of this video, and I will see you on the other side when this has completed. Either it would have completed the installation or it would give me some errors, and we will take it from there. Alright, so just as we had discussed earlier, it took around about a couple of hours, but it seems like all the steps in the installation has completed without any errors. So let me just click on that link that says post setup configuration tasks, and of course we'll be doing that in one of the next videos, not this one. Let me close this right now, as it seems like the installation has completed successfully. Let me also open this log file for you, so we can go through the steps just to see what all went. Let me quickly close this one. First thing, config manager bootstrapper starts installing, and there's nothing really much that we can read this way. So yeah, let's exit out of it. And it seems like our configuration manager installation went successful. So just one last thing in this particular video, if you remember, we also installed configuration manager console on this server when we were performing the installation. We will click it and see if everything is fine, if the console is launching. Of course, we will not go into the details of the tabs that we have, just to make sure that the console is launching fine. Otherwise, sometimes you'll end up having a connection issue where config manager console fails to connect with a database server or something. But in this case, it seems like it all went fine. So yeah, that's a successful installation and setup of configuration manager environment. Now remember, this is only the on-prem portion of it. There is also an Intune portion of it, which comes later in the video series. So again, thanks for watching and stay tuned for more.